Hello, everyone. We have an incredible guest today, Nina Kottler. She is a head of AI in radiology. Nina, you've had an incredible journey and a very unique background. You come from an applied mathematics degree. You worked for Raytheon in the past, and now you're a chief medical AI officer. Tell us a little bit about that transformation and what does a chief medical AI officer actually do?
Well, I'll say to start that my journey growing up, my father was a physicist, a nuclear physicist, and he worked in defense. He worked with MIT's Lincoln Labs. And I grew up playing math games in the car. And so I just thought, what do? You go and do what you're good at. And so I went into math. I never thought about becoming a physician. That just wasn't on my brain until I was in graduate school. And when I was in graduate school, I was working with a group that was very applied, using math to solve problems, which was much more interesting to me than like pure mathematics. And one of the things that they were doing was they were applying math to model different parts of the body. It's kind of like now we talk about that as having a second human, but it's a model of the human.
Yeah.
And we were doing that back then. It was with sort of differential equations and a little more old fashioned. But one of my colleagues was getting his master's and he asked me to help him with these differential equations to model the kidney. So solute and solvent flow of the kidney. And I'm like, okay, cool. That sounds interesting. And you have to learn about the kidney. The kidney
Right.
to me was way more fascinating than the math. And I was like, wow, I just thought you should go and do what you're told to or what you're good at. And I never really opened my mind to the universe of what's out there and what I was passionate about. I just had no idea. And so I said, I'm going to now do the same thing. I'm going to switch from getting my PhD to a master's. We applied it to that same model. I created the next version of that model for the kidney and then went to med school. Now, it was a bit of a journey because I had to go back and do pre med. So I have been in school for many, many years. Went back and did pre med, then med school. And when I was going through that, I think things have just come together in a way that I wouldn't have expected. Like radiology, first of all, very cutting edge, very technology focused. And like that's kind of who I am. I'm tech focused. But I never thought that like whoever thought AI was going to be a thing. When I started medicine, that was in the year 2005 after I
Yeah.
graduated from residency, like a really long time ago. And we can talk about it, but I think sliding doors, different things happen, the choices we make, and I ended up now joining a radiology practice 13 years ago that enabled me to choose my path. And so as my career's evolved because I've evolved as a human, trying to figure out what is it that I like, what interests me. And now I realize like follow your passion. And so I've had maybe 10 different roles in Radiology Partners. And now, as you say, I'm the chief medical AI officer for Mosaic Clinical Technologies. Mosaic is the technology arm. It's a business unit of Radiology Partners that really just like split off this year so that we can concentrate on the tech.
Tell me more about just the split off, right? One of the things that's always hard to figure out with AI projects is the ROI and how do you make it a viable business? So, is that a part of why you split off the company to really focus on that ROI for AI?
I think in part, yes. The main driver, the way that I like to think about it, because we were talking about splitting off this business unit for a while, because I'd been doing AI. AI came into radiology in 2016. In fact, AI came into healthcare in 2016, and it went to radiology first. So it's been there for 10 years now. And we started creating our own AI in 2017. So we've been doing it for a long time. And if you've ever read the book, The Innovator's Dilemma, you
Yeah.
realize that when you're trying to do something innovative and you put an innovative business unit within a unit that has sort of standardized, long-standing, mature processes, it never works. Like it fails 100% of the time. So when I developed my team and even when I started doing it, I just created different processes than the processes of a mature radiology practice. Right? Radiology's been around for years. And I was able to do that for a while. Now that that capability of what we've been doing has been growing, we realize that the entire business unit needs to be able to be innovative. And not everyone is. We have different goals. Like you said, you need a different kind of thought on what your values are, what your mission is, where you're going toward. And return on investment is part of it. I think our mission in Radiology Partners has been to transform radiology. That mission is the same mission we have in the business unit component of Mosaic, but we're applying it from a technology standpoint because, in my opinion, the place that we're at today in healthcare, where we have way too little capacity for the massive amount of volume that's coming through, massive volume capacity mismatch. We don't have good enough quality. The cost is too high. People are unhappy. Like, though, that constellation of things can only be fixed by technology. So having that tech business just concentrating on the problem, solving the problems that we have in technology today makes a lot of sense, and we can have our own processes to do that.
Tell me how you define the problem. I know that's the most important part of success, right? Is correctly defining the problem you're trying to solve. So, what problem are you trying to solve within radiology partners?
It is probably one of the most important things I learned in my math career was how do you solve problems? Because we were using math to solve problems. And this may sound like super basic and obvious, but maybe sometimes the most important things are the obvious ones.
Yeah.
And I learned that if you're trying to solve a problem, you can't solve an undefined problem, that it's just too big. And if you say, well, how can I improve radiology? That's like a massive problem.
Right.
There's too many components of it. So you have to break it down into its individual parts. So when we say we want to transform radiology, that is too general. Like, how do you be specific about that? And the problems when AI, I'll start at least in 2016, when AI first started coming out in radiology, the problem back then was different than it is today. Back then, the problem is about how can we define and improve quality? And with that, how can quality be sustainable? Part of what makes us great in the US is that we're competitive, and as a business, to do something well, you have to be sustainable. And we wanted quality to be that thing that could be sustainable. And back then, when you would ask, like, who's the best quality in radiology, everyone would raise their hand. They'd all be like, I am.
Right.
Why? They all had different reasons, and they were usually not very quality metrics. They were usually operational metrics. Like, without a report card, everyone's an A student. So the idea is, how do you create that report card? And AI helped us back then. And the way that it did it was by making us more sensitive as radiologists to detect findings. So less missed findings. We don't want to miss things. We do. We're human. AI helped us miss less things. It enhanced our detection. And that did drive downstream sustainability for some groups, because enhanced detection in a fee-for-service environment, which most of the US is fee for service. If you're a hospital, you do more, you get more. You're driving more endpoints. So you can get more imaging, you can get more follow-up, you get more patients in the system. Now it's the right patients, so it's the right thing to do. But it also provided some of that ROI. Now that was back 2016. Every year that in the last, 10 years, I would say the volume of imaging has outpaced the capacity. The difference is about a 10x. It's a 0.4% capacity increase in how much we can do as radiologists by how many people we're training. Wow. And it's a 4.3% increase in imaging. So that's a 10x difference. Those numbers are small, 4% and 0.4, but it's a 10x difference. Every year that's happening. In 2022, we crossed the threshold of not being able to manage it anymore. We used all the technology we had at the time. We started reading faster. At that point, it was affecting patient care. So turnaround times became longer, especially if you're an outpatient and you're waiting for your cancer diagnosis or your follow-up study. You could start waiting. I think at this point, there are some sites that are waiting not just hours or days, like weeks or months to get their result. And that's a completely different problem than a quality problem. Now you're talking about a capacity problem. And when we look at the solutions that we had been deploying for quality, they didn't solve the capacity problem. Like, we in radiology were partners, were using more AI than I think probably in radiology than anyone in the world. Hundreds of millions of exams we were running through AI, and we had about a 1% capacity improvement.
Wow.
So that's why this has changed. It's such a massive problem right now that it's not a problem just for radiology practices. Suddenly it's become a problem for hospitals, because they can't get patients through the emergency department fast enough. They're losing patients because they're not getting their results on time. It's costing them more money because they're trying to make a decision without that information. And radiology practices, which I don't know how much you or the audience knows about this, but most radiologists are not employed directly by the hospital. Radiology practices are contracted by the hospital through a professional service agreement, and they say, can you do our reads? And what's happening is these radiology practices are saying, I can't find enough radiologists to support our volume. I have to cut your service. I'm not going to work for you anymore. So hospitals are like, if you don't have a radiology department, you're just out of business. So hospitals are suddenly losing radiology practices. So they're paying large subsidies to radiology practices just to keep them in business. So it's all horrible. Like, it's a terrible story. The
Yeah.
good silver lining is that now hospitals and radiology practices are aligned in what we need, and the market's starting to change to how can we fix this capacity problem. I might have gone way off tangent, but hopefully I
No,
answered.
I love that you explain this because a lot of people don't have this background, right? So it's important to understanding the problem. So how do you see what you're doing right now with Mosaic just helping with that? I mean, you mentioned productivity improvement, but of course, with medicine, with human lives, there's always the chance of the wrong diagnosis, and you have so much impact on a human life. So how does that translate productivity? Does that align with, honestly, the accuracy and, like you were saying, additional findings, accurate findings?
This is the most important question. You get to the point where if you don't have a read at all, it doesn't matter what the quality of that read is. But does that mean we don't care about quality? No. Like, this is patients, this is healthcare. We absolutely care about quality. So your question is perfect. And what's interesting is we wanted to solve the capacity problem because that's more pressing right now, but we wanted to do it without decreasing quality. That's essential. What we found that when we started creating, and we can talk about what our tool is and how it's doing this, what we found as we started creating these tools is that they were actually improving quality even more than the tools we were using before. Now, why is that? How can we be even better and have this capacity improvement? There's been a significant evolution in technology. Like, things are moving so quickly
Every day.
every day. And it's great. I mean, I use it in my day-to-day life, and the models that I'm using today, which are called foundation models, these are more general models. They can answer all kinds of questions. I have to make sure it's right and tweak it a little bit, but they help me significantly, and they improve my efficiency, my productivity. But they also help me put information together and make me better. We are using foundation models, meaning they weren't trained on doing a single thing. They could do all kinds of things. We are using vision language models that can look at radiology images. They can look at prior images and the prior report because they're vision and language, and they could pre-draft a radiology report for me, kind of like an AI resident. Now, the proviso with anything is safety. And safety, you have to think about it as a end user of this, but the FDA also thinks about this. So anything that uses computer vision has to go through the FDA. So these tools are in the research stage right now. We're rolling them out under an IRB, under a research protocol. But we're starting to see the difference. If you can remember when you were using GPT 3.0 before it came Chat
Yeah,
GPT, and it did a few things. It was sort of helpful. And now compare that to what you're seeing today and
quite
how
a bit.
it's
Yeah,
just completely different. And that's the kind of thing. So foundation models, I say, have kind of three benefits over the narrow AI tools that we're using and that are FDA cleared today. Benefit number one, they're general. The AI tools we're using today, have you ever seen this? There's a TV show sitcom called Silicon Valley.
yeah, yeah, of course. Yeah.
In this one, I think it might have been from a few years ago, but one of the guys creates an AI tool that looks at an image and it says what it is. And AI used to not be able to do this. So they show on that sitcom where they take a picture of a hot dog and they send it to the AI and it says hot dog. Like, it diagnoses what's on the exam. Everyone's like, oh my God, that is incredible. You're going to make $1 zillion, right? This is way before we had all of these AI tools. And then they said, try something else. So he takes a picture of pizza and it says, not hot dog. Helpful. That's actually state of the art in radiology right now. All of our AI models are hot dog, not hot dog, which is helpful because it tells us, is there a pneumonia, or do I think there's pneumonia? Is there a hole in the lung that is causing pneumothorax? Is there blood in the brain? Like, those are useful things. Those are useful hot dogs. But it's just telling us for everything else that it's not a hot dog. And we're looking for thousands of things across our imaging exam. This is just one. So, number one, the foundation models are more general. They're looking at the entire study, just like a human would. So, that's big, big bet, important, number one. Number two, the accuracy of foundation models, which just uses a different architecture for how AI works, they're higher accuracy than these narrow AI models we're using today, which is really important because most things in healthcare, most diseases are fairly uncommon. And
Mm.
when things are uncommon, models that are not good enough give you tons of false positives. And that's not great for healthcare. You don't want to come back for 1,000 of wrong calls. So you need a model that's really high quality for all of those uncommon findings. So it's more accurate. So we're finding even more enhanced detection with these foundation models than we found with the narrow sort of convolutional. The third
That's
piece,
interesting. Yeah, that's an
yeah,
interesting finding because I would think it would be the opposite, that you want to have very specific data that you're training on. You don't want to have generalized data, but you're finding that's actually not true.
I thought the same as well. You're right. It's not intuitive. If you
Yeah,
have a specialist that is just really good at heart disease, a cardiologist, they're probably going to be better than your primary care physician at diagnosing heart stuff and treating it because that's what they know. You would think the same thing would be true with AI models, actually ends up as the opposite. And I think what defines a foundation model? A foundation model, Chat GPT, the P in Chat GPT stands for it's pre-trained. So it has to be trained on a lot of underlying data. Most of that underlying data is data from the internet. It's not radiology imaging. It's like pictures of cats and dogs and people doing all kinds of things.
yeah.
But there's information in that about how do you look at the border of something? What's a curve? What's an edge? And then you apply a lot of radiology images to that. That pre-training and then the additional training actually gives it more insight. And we're finding that to be true. So strange, but true.
No, that's perfect. That's super interesting. So as you look at these models, as humans we're so pre-trained. I know myself because I've started using ChatGPT and others for my work. I tend to gloss over the results now because I've done it so many times. I'm like, of course it's right. I find myself much less likely to criticize or to think like, why did it pick up on this trend? Like, is that really accurate? I don't go back and question it enough. That's a human fallacy. Do you find that with radiologists becoming an issue where they're like, well, you know what? The last 9 times I read these reports and they were fine. So I'm just going to skim over this really quick. But in that one, that's when the hallucination happens. That's when we don't catch things.
Yeah, it's a really important point because it is easy to become complacent or have automation bias when things are frequently right and you're trying to find that needle in a pretty big haystack. How do you stay attuned? There's some publications that came out about this, and one that was fairly popular, it came out in the GI journals where there were physicians who were doing colonoscopies who were using AI to help them find polyps. And they found that the physicians using these tools, when they evaluated them later without the tool, they weren't as good as they were before.
Yeah.
Meaning we call it de-skilling. And I think that's what you're saying. Like, how do you prevent de-skilling in this environment? That's one piece. And the second part is, how do you manage the automation bias and complacency that happens as we start getting used to it? And I think that not all of these questions have been answered. I think from a bias standpoint, because it's unconscious and we don't even know it's happening, we have to be really careful about that. And part of what I think the answer is there is we have to provide more information to the end user at the point of care. Number one, you have to have the right end user. Like if I love my mom, she's awesome. She's not a radiologist. She's not a physician. If I gave her an AI result, she's gonna be like, yeah, that's probably right, right?
Right.
You have to give it to the right. And so it's not just human in the loop, which is important, but it's also the right human in the loop. The person that knows more information about the underlying study is going to be less biased than someone who knows less because they can't see through the AI result to know what's right or wrong. So that's number one. Then number two, you need to make sure that you're providing that human with information about how the AI is making a decision. Because right now, hot dog or not hot dog, that's very little information you're getting. And the AI is actually making a decision to determine if the finding is present or not. It's basically looking at the confidence of the model. How confident is it? And then if that confidence goes over a certain threshold, it says yes. even 1 point over that threshold versus 100 points, or 1 point under that threshold, it says no. We should be providing this information to our radiologist or to the end user to say, I'm a little, maybe it's a red, yellow, green light, like be a little more careful with this because I'm not super confident. Maybe the data is a little out of distribution from the data that I trained on. I'm not used to seeing this kind of thing. Maybe the quality of the image that came through wasn't awesome. You can do that in a way where you provide the human with more information. And that is essential. And the question is, what is that information and how do we present it to the end user in a way that's integrated into their system and decision making?
I really like this approach. I've studied a lot around QA AI agent, and I feel like even with all the human stuff, we almost need other AI agents checking the work and going over it and highlighting, something that they might pick up. Because to your point around, I do RFPs. It's not as life-threatening or anything. You answer questions. It gives you accuracy of the response. And when I see 90 or 99 in the response accuracy, I don't even read the answer. That's how confident I am in that AI answer. I'm like, 90, that's green. That's good to go. 50, I'm going to be like erasing that. I need to go somewhere else, right? I need to look this up. But I feel like it's that overconfidence in that, as humans, we're still responsible for, and as doctors probably, for the results from a legal perspective. We can't hold machine responsible for the result because it's a machine. We don't have regulations around that. So the radiologist still reading this and they get 90% confidence in the result. They're still responsible if there's a chance that that result is wrong. How do we handle that? Like that whole regulatory aspect of it?
So the regulatory aspects are really interesting. So we have the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, that oversees and determines what is a medical device. Anything that's considered a medical device must go through the FDA for a quality and safety evaluation to make sure that that tool is safe enough, the efficacy is there, that if it were going to be used, it would be safe for patients. It's hard. It's been a little difficult for the FDA because they are a body that works off legislation. That legislation was created for them in the 1970s, back when we didn't have AI or even software. So most of that legislation is written for hardware. How do you determine if a hardware is safe or not? Now, hardware is a pretty static thing. You could test it before you go and deploy it. You can test it in a lab. And when you go deploy it, it should work pretty similarly. But software does not. Software is very dependent on the environment, the kind of data that comes in, the way it's integrated, and healthcare. Well, that's just crazy. So it's been quite difficult for the FDA to say, how do I regulate and understand the safety of this device when I'm doing it the same way that I did it for hardware? And they've been very forward thinking in this area. They've done a few things. First, they defined what is a medical device, what are they going to regulate, and what are they not going to regulate. And right now, anything with images, they're going to regulate. They decided that they're not going to oversee, at least at the moment, language models.
Okay.
So let's concentrate on imaging for now. That may change in the future, but that gives us a little bit of a better understanding of like what is the realm that they're overseeing. Piece is that we need to then make sure that these tools are going to be utilized appropriately once they're in practice. And so the FDA said the way that we're doing things now, which is we evaluate the tool in a lab environment and say, go ahead and use it in practice, is not going to work. Because in practice, you might get different outputs. And I'll tell you, we have seen that. In fact, there are FDA cleared tools because we validate every AI model, even if it's FDA cleared, on our own data, our own patients, our own exams, to make sure that it gets to our clinical level of quality. And we had one study that didn't pass, even though it was FDA cleared. So you have to do that. But also, once you put it in place, the quality can change over time, because the data is changing that comes into it. The environment is changing. COVID all of a sudden came up. That didn't exist before. Do you think an AI model that was looking for pneumonia would find COVID when it wasn't really a thing? No. So the FDA said, and they came out with this January of last year, they said, we have to think about these tools more holistically on sort of a system level. Instead of just it working before you deploy, we need to look at what they call the total product life cycle. TPLC. Let's look at it before you deploy, but then let's look at it as you monitor it over time, and how is that changing, and how are you making sure that patients are safe in that environment?
Oh, that's great. So is it like regular audits that they do, or what does that actually look like in practice?
It's not been fully defined, and I
Okay.
think the FDA doesn't have the regulatory authority, although I may be wrong. I don't think they have the regulatory authority to ensure that it happens. So they are recommending that it happens. So I think we do need to work with the FDA on how to do it, because it's hard for them. If they're not deploying, how can they make up the rules? And they need a lot of expertise, and they're very good about seeking input from other groups that have this information. The other thing we need to do is we need to talk with legislatures about what is appropriate, what's not, because they may need some new legislation so that the FDA can enforce these things. And we need to create our own sort of governing bodies and best practices of how to do this. So those are starting to come up, where we say, let's not have it be the Wild West and everyone decide to evaluate their AI tools in different ways. Let's just sort of create a standard of what we think is best. So that we're trying to push really hard on that at Radiology Partners, because we're deploying these things and we need to have safety mechanisms that are far out in front of where the market is. So we're providing a lot of guidance to some of those groups like the American College of Radiology, and also to government and the FDA.
Do you have to comply with like HIPAA regulations because it's client? Okay.
Yeah. So HIPAA also needs probably some updates. It was created a long time ago, but it's about how do you protect patient safety, patient information. The good thing about software in, the evolution from analog to digital is that we can now know, we could audit how well we're doing with that. So there's benefits as well. But I think we have to be careful about how we think. We want to make sure that these tools are safe for patients. But if we go too far, it actually might be less safe for patients. And let me give you an example, because that sounds backward. They're like, well, if you're protecting patient safety, how is that less safe? There is a lot of these rules are state-based about regulations. There's not a lot of federal regulations around this. HIPAA is a federal regulation, but then there's state-based laws that sit on top of that. And there's one state that put out a law that said a patient has to be right. They have to read and agree to a very specific agreement that would tell them that you could use their data specifically for AI, not like a general, you come into the hospital, you sign this general consensus conformance agreement. This is very specific to AI. The second part of it is they say, if that patient at some point in the future decides that they don't want their information as part of the AI, all of those tools that use that information have to be able to extract it. That is very difficult to do. And most of the data AI is trained on is de-identified anyway. So what's happening, when I started hearing about this a couple of years ago, I talked to some groups who were creating AI tools, and they said, yeah, we're not training with data from that state. And that means that those patients are actually, they're not going to be represented. And so the AI might not work as well in those patients. So we actually have to be careful about the implications of what we do, because we want patients to be safe, but we don't want to push things so far that we end up doing the opposite just because we're not understanding the implication.
That makes sense. What do you see the roadmap like for your product just going forward, given how quickly things are evolving?
All right. So I haven't talked too much about even what our product is. I've been
Yeah,
we're using foundation models, but like, what does this really mean? And I'll say that we are trying to make sure that we can apply the most modern technology to healthcare, because that's never happened before. It happens more in radiology than anywhere else, right? There's MRI scanners, there's all kinds of new medicine technologies, but the fundamental underlying systems we use are really old. In fact, we still use fax machines. Like, that's crazy. My kids, when we had COVID and they were home, they were communicating with their friends through video games in a way that I couldn't do that in a hospital. So I think we're pretty far behind. What we're trying to do is modernize that. And you have to modernize it at the level of AI. So we're moving from these hot dog, not hot dog, narrow AI models to more foundation models. And as you mentioned, even agents, which are systems. But we have to manage the underlying systems, because the systems in healthcare are old, they're disconnected, they don't move data well. And what happens is they ask the human, in my case, the radiologist, to take all of that information from disparate systems and put it together. And humans are bad at that. We're terrible at integrating information, and we shouldn't have to. Computers are fantastic at it. So what we're doing in Mosaic is we're creating that underlying operating system. And within that operating system, where things can communicate with each other, we are putting these very modern foundation models in there that are smart and work with the human within their workflow to improve healthcare. And it's that combination. The way I think about an operating system is my phone.
Yeah.
My phone is great. My smartphone is great because I can have tons of applications on that phone on that, but it's the underlying operating system that enables me to use all of those applications seamlessly, all with my fingerprint or my face. And they all know things that I don't need to repeat everything. That's the idea of an operating system. Now apply that to a hospital setting where you have massive amounts of data in all different systems. The things that you can do, the impact that you can create suddenly when that information is together and you've got a AI that's helping you evaluate, you can transform a lot of the sick care that we're doing to healthcare.
Be more proactive, finding things earlier in the process.
There's way more information in the pixels of the imaging that we're getting than we're actually interpreting as humans alone. There's information, people are wearing rings and all kinds of devices that are providing information from minute to minute. This massive onslaught of information should be used. Genetics, genomics, radiomics, proteomics, all of these omics. This is just a massive amount of data that come to the system that can personalize the care from what we're doing today to make it more precise for that patient. And when I say go from sick care to healthcare, that's kind of like, it could have no meaning. A politician who doesn't know much about it could say that, and you could be like, oh, Nina, why are you saying that? That has no meaning. What I mean by that is we're finding that AI has been very good at using the imaging to predict disease and see it before we can actually visualize it. When we can start doing that and doing it at scale, then we can transition how we're treating patients to at the end stage of their disease to before it actually happens. So that's healthcare. And we are starting to, using the same exam, an exam that's done for some other reason, find all kinds of other things. We call it opportunistic screening. Screen for other things that you weren't getting that exam for. So you don't have to go in and get another exam. We could do it on the study that you have already.
Which will hopefully cut down on that demand as well and like let you actually process more information and spend time on each radiology report, which is what we're trying to do, right? Is really improve that quality.
Yeah, the reason why I went into radiology, it was so long ago. We didn't have all of these systems. It was in the time where you see like on Scrubs or something where they put up the actual image and it's a physical image. It's not digital. That's when I was in medical school. Everything was on a actual film and our reports were not electronic. They were dictated. So it took like weeks to get a report, which meant that every group in the hospital, the first thing they did when they did their rounds, they went into the reading room to talk to the radiologist about their imaging because they couldn't get it from a computer. It wasn't that, it didn't exist. They had to get the hard copy. And that kind of communication that happened back and forth, that care coordination was amazing. It is unfortunate that with technology and systems, no one does that anymore. They connect through electronic means. And so instead of this great robust history we used to get from our colleagues and this discussion back and forth, we now get trauma, please evaluate, or you get some billing code, and that's your history. So we need a way to get back to that time, sort of back to the future. You don't want to pull everyone back into the reading room, but you want to have that robust discussion. And if radiologists are spending all of their time doing all this administrative stuff, we just don't have the capacity to do that. And neither do other clinicians. We need to take away that administrative load so we can get back to that human connectedness.
I love that purpose. I mean, that's really, really important. And it hopefully will make healthcare better for all of us as we go through our own aging process, right, in the future. Nina, leave us with, I mean, you're just such a light and you brought so much amazing information into this discussion. What do you want to leave our audience with?
I think I would say don't be afraid of AI. I didn't take a single course on AI. The way that I learned AI was by using it. I talked to lots of people. I talked to vendors who were creating it, not the salespeople. Sorry, salespeople. I talked to the engineers that were doing it, the scientists behind it, and I used it. You can use it every day. Start doing that. Be proactive because our future is depending on how well we can oversee these tools. We don't want them to oversee us. And I have a strong belief that we can drive our own future. We have control over that. If you develop expertise in something, then you're the one that gets to drive where things go because people will go to you and ask questions. And whether you are in healthcare or some other arena, the world is moving to a place where it's going to be driven by technology. You should become the expert on that and not let it be the expert over you.
I love that. Use technology. I agree. And it's changing so quickly. You learn something and it'll teach you something. It's kind of goes back and forth, right?
And I'll make one final
Sure.
recommendation because there's so much money in like Meta and OpenAI and Claude or Anthropic. All of these groups are paying a lot of money for the people who are the best experts in creating AI to go there and create AI. I would make a plea for anyone in the audience that knows someone who is an expert in this area. Think about going into healthcare. Wouldn't it be better instead of making $1 billion to help a billion people?
Can you do both?
Really need to do
Yeah, you can do both. Um,
it. That'd be
I
great.
agree. You can scale and it is nice to help people. I mean, that's the purpose. I always said that I love technology because it helps make business applications better. So thank you so much, Nina, for your time today. I really appreciate it. This has been so insightful.
You are very welcome. It was wonderful to speak with you. And sorry I took so long making lots of explanations, but this was fun.
No, this was awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Take care.
All right. Bye.